The blood was not supposed to be there. Mara Cole saw it before she saw anything else. A dark red trail cutting through the white, wide enough to mean something serious, and it did not belong on the ridge behind her grandfather's cabin at 10 o'clock at night, in the middle of a snowstorm. She had been walking back from the woodpile with her arms full of split logs, and she had almost stepped in it. Her boot came down half an inch from the edge of the stain, and she stopped. She should have kept walking. She had a fire to build, a door to bolt, and a storm that had been getting louder for the past hour. The ridge was no place to be standing still. The temperature had already dropped past the point where breath hung in the air like smoke, and the wind was coming down from the mountain in long, cold waves that made her eyes water. She stood there anyway. The trail moved in a jagged line toward the tree line, and something at the end of it was not moving. She could see a shape in the snow about 30 feet away, dark, large, completely still. Mara set the logs down against the cabin wall and picked up the lantern she kept hanging by the door. She told herself she was only going to look. She looked. It was a wolf, massive, bigger than any wolf she had ever seen in books or in the wild, and it was lying on its side in the snow with one rear leg caught at a wrong angle. There was a gash along its flank that had been bleeding hard and long, based on the trail it had left, and its breathing was shallow. Not the breathing of something sleeping, the breathing of something that had been fighting to stay alive and was running out of time. Mara held the lantern out and studied the wound without touching anything. She had grown up in the mountains. She knew what wolves could do. She also knew, looking at this one, that it was not going to survive the night without help. The cold alone would finish what the blood loss had started. She stood in the snow for a long moment. Then she went back to the cabin, set down the lantern, and came back with a thick blanket, the rope she used for hauling gear, and a long pair of leather work gloves. Getting him inside nearly broke her. The wolf was dead weight and then some, and twice she nearly lost her footing on the ice. He did not fight her. That was either a good sign or a very bad one. She chose to believe it was a good sign, because the alternative was doing all of this for nothing, and she had already committed. She pulled him through the cabin door and got him onto the old rug in front of the fireplace. She got the fire going first, because warmth was more urgent than anything else. Then she went to the shelf where her grandfather had kept his field supplies. He had been a former army medic who believed in being prepared for anything, and for once in her life she was grateful for that habit. She cleaned the wound. She used what she had: antiseptic, gauze, thread, and steady hands. Her grandfather had taught her to stitch a cut at the age of 10 on a piece of leather, and she had never forgotten. She worked slowly, carefully, talking to the wolf in a low voice, not because she thought he could understand, but because the silence was too heavy and her own heartbeat was too loud. The wound was deep but clean. Whatever had caused it had been sharp rather than ragged. She did not want to think about what that meant. She finished stitching. She wrapped the flank with gauze and tucked the blanket around him. He had not made a single sound through any of it. She sat back on the floor and looked at him. The mark on his haunch caught her eye for the first time properly. She had noticed it during the cleaning, but pushed it aside to focus on the wound. Now she looked at it directly. It was not a brand. She had seen brands on livestock. This was nothing like that. It was a pattern in the fur itself, a silver marking that curved in a shape she did not recognize, deliberate looking, almost like a symbol. It did not look like something nature had put there. She filed it away and told herself she would think about it in the morning. The fire was burning well now. The storm outside was hammering the shutters and sending snow under the door in thin white lines. The wolf's breathing had deepened a little since she had started working, which she chose to take as a good sign too. She got her sleeping bag from the cot in the back room, carried it out, and laid it on the floor near the fire. She told herself she was sleeping out here because she needed to monitor him through the night. That was the practical reason. The true reason was that the storm was loud, the cabin was small, and there was something about the rise and fall of his chest that made the noise quieter. She did not let herself examine that too closely. She turned down the lantern and lay down. The fire cracked and settled. The wind came in waves. The wolf breathed, slow and steady now, the kind of breathing that belonged to something that had decided to stay. Mara closed her eyes. She had been keeping herself alive by moving through things rather than sitting inside them. Grief, loss, the particular exhaustion of being 31 with no one who knew where she was on a given night. She had come to her grandfather's cabin 3 weeks ago after his funeral, telling herself it was just to sort his things and close up the property before winter made the road impassable. She had not sorted a single thing. She had been sitting in the cold and the quiet and waiting for herself to figure out what she was going to do next. She was still waiting. She did not realize she had fallen asleep until she woke up and found that her hand had moved during the night and was resting against the wolf's side, against the warmth of his fur. She did not pull it back. Outside, the storm had gone completely silent. The snow had stopped. Through the one small window above the sink, she could see a sky beginning to go from black to deep blue. The fire had burned down to coals, and the cabin was dim and still and very warm. She lay there in the half-dark and felt her own heartbeat and listened to his breathing and understood, very slowly, that she was not in a hurry to get up. That was new. She had been in a hurry to get up every morning for longer than she could precisely remember. A hurry to be somewhere, to be doing something, to be in motion. To stop moving felt like sinking, and she had always been afraid of sinking. But this morning, in this cabin, in the dark before sunrise, she was not moving, and she did not feel like she was sinking. She felt, for the first time in a long time, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, which made no sense at all, because she was lying on the floor of her dead grandfather's cabin next to a wolf she had dragged in from a snowstorm, and nothing about this situation was supposed. She closed her eyes again and breathed. She would get up in a minute. She stayed on the floor until the sky outside the window turned from blue to pale gray to the first faint gold of morning. She stayed until the coals in the fireplace had gone fully cold. She stayed until the warmth was all his, and none of it was the fire anymore. Then she sat up and looked at him, really looked, in the growing light, and the wolf was gone. The blanket was still there, the gauze, the blood-stained rug, the rope she had used to pull him inside, but in the place where the wolf had been, there was a man. He was lying on his side, facing the dead fireplace, and he was not moving. He was broad-shouldered and dark-haired, and where his shirt should have been there was nothing, just the marked skin of his ribs, and along those ribs, curving in a shape she recognized immediately, was the same silver mark she had stitched shut 6 hours ago on the flank of a wolf. The same mark. Mara did not scream. She had never been a screamer. She stood up very slowly, walked backward 3 steps to the kitchen, picked up the fireplace poker from beside the cold stove, and stood there holding it. The man breathed, slow, present, alive. His eyes opened. They were dark, the kind of dark that did not have a color so much as a depth, and they found her immediately, across the dim cabin, without any of the confusion that should have been there if he was waking up in an unfamiliar place. He looked at her the way someone looks at a thing they have already thought about, already decided about. He said, in a voice that was low and unhurried and completely clear, "You shouldn't be here." Mara tightened her grip on the poker. "I live here," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the cabin, the walls, the fireplace, the shelf with her grandfather's supplies, the bloody gauze on the floor, and something in his expression shifted, not surprise, something closer to the look of a person revising a calculation. "Your grandfather," he said. It was not a question. Mara did not answer. He sat up. He moved carefully, one hand going to his ribs where she had stitched the wound, and he pressed lightly at the gauze as though checking the work. His face did not change. Then he looked back at her, and she realized he was not looking at the poker. He was looking at her hands, and his gaze had the quality of something measuring, not threatening, but precise. "You stitched it yourself," he said. "Yes," she said. "In the dark." "I had a lantern." A pause. Something crossed his face that was almost a smile. "That was not a small thing to do," he said. "Dragging you inside was the hard part," she said. "You weigh an unreasonable amount." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I am Calum." She did not lower the poker. "I didn't ask." "No," he said, "you didn't." The morning light was coming through the window now, pale and flat and winter white, and it landed across him in a way that made the silver mark on his ribs visible from where she stood. She looked at it without meaning to. He watched her look at it, and he did not cover it or explain it. He just let her see. "What are you?" she asked. He held her gaze. "Something that was bleeding in the snow last night," he said, "and is not dead this morning. Because of you." Mara stood very still with the poker in her hands and the cold morning all around her, and the weight of what had just happened sitting in her chest like a stone that had not decided yet whether it was going to fall. She looked at him. He looked back. His eyes had not moved from her face. Not once. Not to the door, not to the window, not to the blood on the floor. He was looking at her the way she had heard people describe stars looking at each other across great distances, like they were the only two fixed points in a space that was otherwise in motion. She had never been looked at that way. She did not know what to do with it. She set the poker down against the wall, not because she felt safe, but because holding it any longer felt like lying about what this was. "I'm going to make coffee," she said. "All right," he said. She turned to the stove. Her hands, she noticed, were shaking. She had not let them shake at anything since she was 14 years old. She kept her back to him and held the kettle handle and waited for herself to stop. She did not stop for a long time. Outside, the ridge was white and still and absolutely silent, the storm gone as though it had never come, and the snow on the ground was perfect and untouched except for the long dark trail that led from the tree line to her door. She kept her back to him. She breathed. She thought, "I stopped for him." She thought, "I don't stop for things." She thought, and yet. The coffee was the only ordinary thing left in the cabin, and Mara held on to it. She poured 2 cups without being asked, and she sat down on the far side of the table, and she set 1 cup in front of the man who had been a wolf, and she drank hers slowly and watched him. Calum sat at the table like he had sat at tables all his life, straight-backed, unhurried, both hands wrapped around the mug, as though the warmth of it was something he was choosing to appreciate rather than need. The silver mark on his ribs caught the morning light every time he shifted. She kept not quite looking at it. "Your grandfather knew what I am," he said. She put her cup down. "Say that again." "Edmund Cole," he said. "He knew the pack. He maintained the northern boundary of our territory for 30 years. He never entered it without permission, and we never crossed south of the ridge." He paused. "The cabin is his. The ridge was the agreement." Mara thought about her grandfather. A quiet man, a man who had loved the mountain the way other people loved family, as something you were responsible for, whether it was convenient or not. A man who had never once mentioned wolves. "He didn't tell me," she said. "He wouldn't have," Calum said. "It wasn't his secret to give." She turned her cup in her hands. "So what happened to you last night? What caused the wound?" He looked at the table for a moment. Not evasion. She could read evasion, and this was something else. It was the look of someone deciding how much truth was going to be useful. "A trap," he said. "Someone set a trap for a wolf on your own territory?" "Someone set a trap for me specifically." He looked up. "It was not random." Mara absorbed that. "So someone tried to hurt you." "Someone tried to end me," he said, with the kind of quiet that made the words heavier rather than lighter. "And they almost did." She thought about the wound, the depth of it, the clean edge. "Almost," she said. "Because you were on the ridge," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not part of your world." "No," he agreed. "So why does it feel like I'm already standing in the middle of it?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her with those dark eyes that had not moved from her face, not really, since the moment they had opened, and she felt the weight of his attention the way you feel weather. something coming in from a distance, something you can't hold back no matter how well you've built the walls. Because you stopped, he said. I stopped for nothing, she said. I know, he said. And yet, she felt the air go out of the room a little. He had said the same words she had been thinking half an hour ago. And yet, and he could not have known that. He could not have heard it. And still he had said it, and it sat in the silence between them like something placed there carefully. Before she could respond, the sound came from outside. Not the wind, not an animal, the sound of movement, multiple sets of feet, coordinated, coming down from the tree line toward the cabin. The kind of approach that was not an accident. Caleb was on his feet before she had fully processed the noise. He moved across the cabin in 3 steps, silent and fast, and stood to one side of the front window, looking out at an angle without showing himself. Mara stood up. What is that? The pack, he said. Your pack. Yes. He did not look away from the window. And no. She moved to the window on the other side and looked out. Through the glass she counted 12 of them coming out of the tree line, not in wolf form, which she had half expected and was unprepared for either way, but as people, men and women, moving in a group that had a specific shape to it, a formation that was not casual. They were dressed for the cold, and they moved like they owned the ground they were walking on. At the front of the group walked a woman. She was tall, pale-haired, and she moved in a way that separated her from the rest, without any apparent effort. She was looking at the cabin with an expression that was focused and entirely without warmth. Who is she? Mara asked. Sable, he said. The single word had no extra weight to it, just the name, but the name itself, the way it sat in the air, told her enough. Is she the one who set the trap? A pause. I don't know yet, he said. Which is why I need you to stay back from the door. This is my cabin, Mara said. I know. So I'll stand where I like. He looked at her then. A quick, direct look. The kind that understood something in the same instant it saw it. He did not argue. The knock at the door was 3 sharp raps. Controlled. Expected. Mara opened it. Sable stood on the step with 4 of the others arranged behind her in a loose half-circle, and her eyes went past Mara immediately and found Caleb standing at the back of the cabin. The look that passed between them was fast and layered and not something Mara could entirely read. Then Sable looked at Mara. She did it the way you look at a piece of furniture that has been moved into a room where it doesn't belong. This is not your territory, Sable said. I'm standing inside my own front door, Mara said. The ridgeline is pack ground, Sable said. The cabin sits on pack ground. Edmund Cole was permitted to remain here by grace of the Alpha. Her eyes moved back to Caleb. That permission does not transfer. The permission transfers through me, Caleb said from the back of the room. Sable's jaw tightened. She is human. I'm aware of what she is, he said. She has no standing. She has mine, he said. That is enough. There was a silence, not the comfortable kind, the kind that had weight and temperature. The others in the half-circle had not moved, but something in their stillness had changed, a tightening, the way a room changes when 2 people stop being polite. Mara stood in the doorway and did not step back, because stepping back would mean something in this world she was still learning the rules of, and she was not going to let the first lesson be about retreat. Sable looked at her again. Not the furniture look this time, something sharper. You have no idea what you've walked into, Sable said. I didn't walk into anything, Mara said. I was already here. Something moved behind Sable's eyes. Not respect exactly. Something that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago, which was close enough. She took a step back from the doorway. The others in the group shifted slightly, a collective adjustment that followed her lead. The Alpha will be expected at the summit, Sable said, speaking past Mara now. To Caleb, the pack does not wait. The pack can wait one more day, he said. Sable's eyes moved to Mara one final time. The look she gave her was not a threat. It was, if anything, something more complicated than a threat. It was the look of a person recalibrating something they thought they had already understood. Then she turned and walked back toward the tree line, and the others followed, and within 2 minutes the ridge was empty and white and silent again, as though no one had ever been there. Mara closed the door. She stood with her back to it for a moment. "Summit," she said. "A gathering of the northern packs," Calum said. "It happens once a year. I was meant to arrive 3 days ago. They came to collect you. They came to see if I was still alive," he said. "Which are 2 different things." She turned and looked at him. He was still standing in the same spot he had moved to when the knock came, near the fireplace, which was still cold. The silver mark on his ribs was visible in the morning light, and he had not attempted to cover it. "What did you mean when you said, 'She is mine'?" Mara said. Calum looked at her for a moment, before he answered. It was not a pause of uncertainty. It was the pause of a person who is choosing words carefully because they understand the weight of them. "In the pack," he said, "the alpha's mate is under his protection. The words carry a specific meaning." "I'm not your mate," she said. "No," he said, "you are not." She waited. "But you are the reason I am alive," he said, "and that carries its own weight, in our world and outside of it. You were protecting me," she said, "from Sable. I was telling the truth," he said. "Those 2 things are not always different." Mara crossed the room to the fireplace and crouched down and started building the fire, because the cabin was cold and her hands needed something to do. She layered the kindling without looking at him and felt his eyes on her back and did not tell him to stop. She got the fire started. She sat on the floor in front of it, the same way she had sat the night before, when he had been something other than what he was now. "Someone in your pack tried to kill you," she said to the fire. "Yes. And you don't know who." "I have a strong idea," he said. "I don't yet have a certainty. And the summit, will you be safe there?" She heard him move. He came and crouched down beside her, near the fire, close enough that the warmth of him was different from the warmth of the flames. He did not answer immediately. "Probably not," he said. She looked at him sideways. He was looking at the fire. His profile was sharp and still in the firelight. And he looked, not afraid. That was not the word. He looked like someone who had been carrying something large and heavy for a very long time, and who had learned to carry it so well that even he had started to forget it was there. "But you'll go anyway," she said. "I have to," he said. "The pack needs to see me standing." She thought about that. The idea of showing up somewhere you were not safe, because other people needed to see you were not broken. She understood that. She had been doing a version of it for years. "I'll drive you," she said. He looked at her. "I have a truck," she said. "The road is passable now that the storm stopped. If you need to be somewhere, I can get you there faster than walking, and you're not in any condition to shift again with that wound." "You don't know what you'd be walking into," he said. "Sable told me I had no idea what I'd walked into," she said. "And she was right. But I drove up here 3 weeks ago, and I've been sitting in this cabin, not knowing what to do next. And at some point, not knowing what to do next becomes its own kind of trap." She paused. "I'll drive you. You'll tell me what I need to know on the way, and then I'll decide what I do after that." Calum looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "All right." The fire between them had grown into something real, warm and bright and independent of them both. Mara held her hands out to it and felt the cold leaving her fingers, and she thought about her grandfather, who had known about this world and kept the boundary and never once let the 2 sides cross. She thought about how she had crossed it in the dark, in a snowstorm, for a reason she could not name then and could barely name now. She thought about his eyes, when they had first opened, how they had found her across the cabin without looking anywhere else first. She kept her hands near the fire and said nothing, and Calum said nothing, and outside the window the snow on the ridge was white and clean and unmarked, except for where she had walked the night before, and where he had been, and where the 2 trails had, without either of them planning it, ended up at the same door. The truck had not been started in 3 weeks, and it complained about it. Mara sat in the driver's seat with her boot on the gas and coaxed it through 2 failed starts before it caught and settled into a rough, rattling idle that meant it was alive but not happy. That was fine. She had driven it in worse conditions. Caleb sat in the passenger seat and wore a coat she had found in her grandfather's old wardrobe, gray wool, too short in the sleeve by about an inch, and carrying the smell of cedar and old pipe smoke. He had not said anything about the fit. He wore it like it was exactly what he needed. She backed down the cabin's narrow track and turned onto the logging road, and the truck found its pace, and the mountains came in through the windshield in the slow, gray, enormous way they always did on winter mornings when the storm had cleaned everything back to its original color. "The summit is at Ashwood Ridge," he said, 40 minutes north of here. "I know where Ashwood Ridge is," she said. "I used to go up there with my grandfather as a kid." He was quiet for a moment. "He took you up there." "We used to watch for eagles," she said. "He had a notebook. He wrote down every one he saw." She kept her eyes on the road. "He had 74 pages of entries." "He was a careful man," Caleb said. "Meticulous," she said, "about everything except telling his granddaughter she was living next to a pack of wolf shifters." "He was protecting you. That's one way to see it. What's another?" She thought about it honestly, the way she tried to think about everything, without softening it first, to make it easier to hold. "Another way is that he kept me from understanding something important about the place I loved most in the world," she said. "And now he's gone, and I can't ask him about it." She paused. "Both things are true at the same time. I've learned to let them be." Caleb turned to look at her profile. She could feel it without turning to check. "How long ago did he die?" he said. 5 weeks, she said. "And you came up here alone?" "I didn't have anyone to come with me," she said, not bitterly, just the fact of it, laid out plainly. He was quiet after that. The road was icy in the shaded stretches, and she slowed for those, and the truck groaned at the inclines, and the mountain came closer through the windshield, white and cold and enormous, and indifferent, the way she had always found it beautiful rather than frightening. "The wound," she said after a while. "The trap. Who do you think it was?" "Sable's oldest brother," he said. "Owen. He has wanted to challenge the alpha position for 3 years. He has support in the eastern wing of the pack, younger wolves who think the old agreements are weaknesses." "Agreements like the one my grandfather had with you." "Yes," he said, "and others. The northern packs have maintained peace with the human settlements along the mountain range for generations. It requires restraint on both sides. Owen believes that restraint is surrender." He paused. "He is wrong. But he is loud, and the loud thing is not always the true thing. It is just the thing that gets heard." "So he had you attacked," she said, "to take the alpha position by default if you died." "Yes." "Does he know it failed?" "By now, yes," he said, "which means he knows someone helped me, and he will want to know who." Mara glanced at him. "And Sable saw me this morning." "Yes," he said. He met her eyes briefly before she looked back at the road. "Which means you are in this now, whether or not you chose to be. And I am sorry for that." She thought about it for a moment. Not the surface of it, the danger, the threat of it, but the thing underneath, which was that she had made a choice in the snow last night, and the choice had weight, and she was not sorry she had made it. "Don't be," she said. He did not respond to that, but something in his stillness changed, a slight settling, as though something he had been holding carefully had been permitted to rest for a moment. The road climbed. The trees thickened on either side, and then suddenly cleared as they came out onto the upper ridge, and Ashwood Ridge spread out ahead of them in the winter light, a wide, flat area of hard-packed snow between the tree lines, and on it, arranged in a way that looked organic but was not, were dozens of people. She stopped the truck at the edge of the road and looked. They were all sizes and all ages, men and women and a few teenagers, and they were all standing still in the flat gray morning light and looking at the truck, not with surprise, with something else, expectation almost. like they had heard it coming long before she could have expected them to hear anything. "They already know," she said. "Yes," Caleb said. "How long have they known we were coming?" "Since we turned off the logging road," he said. She kept her eyes on the crowd. Sable was at the front. She had beaten them here, which meant she had moved fast, impossibly fast, for a person on foot in the snow, which meant she had not come on foot. "What do I do?" Mara said. "Whatever you decide," Caleb said. "I will not tell you to stay in the truck." She considered that. The crowd was watching, 100 pairs of eyes on the windshield. She had the sensation of being on one side of a line, with the choice about whether to cross it entirely hers, entirely uncomplicated by anyone telling her what to do. She had always made decisions faster when no one was pressuring her. She pushed the door open and got out. The cold hit her immediately, the bright, high-altitude cold that lived up here permanently and had no mercy about it. She walked around the front of the truck and stood beside it and looked at the crowd, and the crowd looked back. Caleb came around the other side and stood next to her, not in front, not behind, next to. She felt that. Sable stepped forward. She walked across the flat snow toward them with the same directional clarity she had shown that morning at the cabin, and stopped 6 feet away and looked at Mara with the expression of someone deciding whether to respect something they had not expected to encounter. "You brought her," Sable said to Caleb. "She drove," he said. "This is not a human matter." "Everything that happens on this mountain is a human matter," Mara said. "Your territory touches human land on 3 sides. Your Alpha's life was saved in a human cabin with human medical supplies by human hands." She looked at Sable directly. "I'm not asking permission to be here. I'm just here." The silence that followed was not comfortable, but it was different from the silence at the cabin that morning. That one had been rejection testing its edges. This one was something trying to find its new shape. A sound from somewhere in the crowd. Not a voice, a murmur, the movement of many people adjusting at the same time. An older man stepped forward from the group. He had white hair and a face like weathered stone, and he moved with the slow authority of someone who did not need to demonstrate anything. "Edmund's granddaughter," he said. Mara looked at him. "Yes." "He spoke of you," the old man said. "Not by name. But he spoke of the girl who climbed the ridge with him to watch the eagles. He said she had good eyes." Mara felt the tightening in her chest that happened every time she ran into a piece of her grandfather she hadn't known existed. "He had good eyes too," she said. "He just didn't show me everything he saw." The old man smiled. It was small and brief and genuine. No, he was careful that way. He looked at Caleb. "The pack is waiting for the account of what happened. They need to hear it from the Alpha directly." "Then let's not make them wait any longer," Caleb said. He moved forward toward the crowd, but before he did, he glanced at Mara. Not a question, not a request, just a look that said, "I see where you are." She nodded once. He walked into the crowd. She stayed at the edge of it, next to the truck and the old man who had known her grandfather, and she listened to the sound of Caleb's voice reaching across the open ridge, calm and clear, and carrying in the cold air with the particular quality of a voice that did not need to raise itself to be heard. She watched the crowd listen. She watched Sable, at the front, with her arms at her sides and her face giving nothing away, and she noted the spot near Sable's left, where a younger man stood with a jaw too tight and eyes too still for someone who was only listening. Owen, she thought. She had not been told what he looked like. She knew anyway. She filed it away. The old man beside her said quietly, "You don't seem frightened." "I've been frightened before," she said. "I just don't let it make my decisions." He nodded slowly, as though that was an answer he had been hoping for. "Edmund would have been glad," he said, "that you were on the ridge last night." Mara said nothing to that. She looked at the crowd, at Caleb standing at the center of it, at the winter sky above Ashwood Ridge, enormous and pale and completely indifferent to everything happening below it. She thought, "I stopped." She thought, "It mattered." She thought, Whatever comes next comes next. The cold settled around her shoulders like something familiar, and she stood in it without flinching, and she listened to the voice of the man she had pulled out of the snow, telling his people the truth about what had nearly been done to him. And in the crowd, Owen's jaw tightened by another degree. And Mara noticed. Calum had not slept since the cabin. Mara could see it in the slight tension at the corner of his eyes, and the way he held his left side, carefully, without drawing attention to it, but carefully nonetheless. The stitched wound was holding, but healing at this scale took time even for someone like him. She knew enough now to know that the shift back to human form the morning before had cost him more than he would say. The pack had set up a camp on Ashwood Ridge, a cluster of structures that looked improvised but weren't. Heavy canvas shelters with iron stoves, built to last a week in mountain winter. She had been given a space in one of them without being asked, a bedroll near the back stove, and no one had explained whether it was hospitality or strategy. She had decided not to ask. Owen had disappeared from the main gathering within an hour of their arrival. She had noted the direction he went and the two men who went with him. She had not said anything yet. She was still watching. Sable came to her just after dark. She came alone, which Mara had not expected. She pushed through the canvas door of the shelter and stood in the lamplight and looked at Mara with an expression that had shed most of its earlier hostility. Not all of it, but most. "You saw Owen this afternoon," Sable said. "It was not a question." "I noticed him," Mara said. "There's a difference." "What did you notice?" Mara looked at her for a moment, deciding. "He was too still," she said. "When someone is listening to something that surprises them, they move, they adjust. He didn't adjust at all, which means he already knew the account Calum was giving. Which means he was there when it happened." Sable sat down on the edge of the cot across from her. She sat with the weight of someone setting something down that they had been carrying. "Owen is my brother," she said. "I know," Mara said. "And you think he set the trap?" "I think Calum believes it," Mara said. "And I think you've believed it since before we arrived today. And I think that's the real reason you came to the cabin this morning. Not to retrieve the alpha, but to see his face when he saw you. To see if he already knew." Sable was quiet for a long moment. "You are not what I expected," she said. "No one ever is," Mara said. "But that's not really a useful thing to say, is it? The more useful thing is whether we can stop what Owen is planning before the summit ends." Sable looked at her. "You want to help?" "I want this not to end badly," Mara said. "Those aren't the same thing, but in this case, they lead in the same direction." The stove clicked as the metal expanded in the heat. Outside, the wind had come up again. Not the force of the night before, just the ordinary cold weather wind that lived on the ridge permanently and moved through the camp in long, low passes. "There is a formal challenge process," Sable said, "within the pack laws. Owen cannot simply take the alpha position by violence alone. He would need the support of the pack elders." She paused. "He has been building that support for 2 years. How close is he?" "Close enough that the trap made sense," she said. "If Calum had not survived, Owen would have called for a vote of succession within the week. He had the numbers to win. And now? Now Calum is alive and standing, and the pack has seen him stand," Sable said. "That changes the numbers, but it doesn't eliminate Owen. And Owen does not accept losses quietly." Mara thought about the man's face in the crowd. The jaw, the stillness. "He'll try again," she said. "Yes," Sable said. "When?" "Before the summit closes," she said. "There is a final night ceremony. The alpha stands alone in the center of the ridge at midnight. Tradition. It dates back 300 years. She looked at Mara directly. "It is the most exposed he will be. And you can't just cancel it," Mara said. "Canceling it would signal weakness," Sable said. "The pack would read it as the alpha hiding. It would achieve what Owen wants without Owen having to do anything." Mara sat with that, the geometry of it, the trap within the tradition, the weapon that used honor against itself. She had seen versions of this in human contexts. in the way institutions could be turned against the people they were meant to protect. The specific shape of it was new. The principle was very old. Then we have to remove Owen's ability to act before midnight, she said. To do that formally, we need proof, Sable said. Not belief, not reading his face in a crowd. Evidence that holds within pack law. What kind of evidence? The trap itself, Sable said. If the mechanism can be recovered and matched to Owen, tool marks, materials, anything specific enough, the elders can act. But the trap was set on the eastern slope. She paused. I cannot go retrieve it without Owen knowing. He watches me. She looked at Mara. You. He does not watch. Yet. Mara understood what was being asked. She thought about it carefully. Not the danger. She was aware of the danger, had been since this morning on the ridge, and she had made her peace with it in the way that she made peace with most things, which was not by pretending it wasn't there, but by deciding it was not going to make the decision for her. I'll need to know exactly where, she said. I can draw you a map, Sable said. I'll need someone who knows the slope. Sable hesitated. Then she said, I can give you one of mine. Someone Owen doesn't know I trust. Is there anyone like that? A ghost of something that might have been a rueful expression moved across Sable's face. One, she said. His name is Garrett. He's young, but he's careful. Careful is what I need, Mara said. You would need to go tonight, Sable said, before Owen sends anyone to retrieve or destroy what's left of the trap. Mara nodded. Then get me Garrett and the map. Sable stood. She looked at Mara with that same expression from the cabin door, the one that had started as furniture assessment and had been turning into something else for the past 24 hours. Calum should know, Sable said. Calum needs to sleep, Mara said. If he knows, he won't. Sable looked at her for another moment. You've known him less than 2 days, she said. Yes, Mara said, I have. Neither of them said anything else about it. They didn't need to. The thing between Mara and Calum had not announced itself with language. It had moved in quieter ways, in how she had stayed on the floor that first morning, in how his eyes had found her without looking anywhere else first, in the parallel of what she had thought and what he had said, and how neither of them had mentioned the coincidence. Sable left to find Garrett. Mara put on her coat and her boots and her grandfather's old gloves that she had brought from the cabin, and she sat in the lamplight of the shelter and looked at her hands. They were not shaking. She had stopped shaking sometime during the long morning in the truck, or possibly sometime during the scene at the cabin with Sable and the pack at the door, or possibly during some moment she had not tracked. She could not say exactly when. She only knew that her hands were steady, and that steadiness felt like something she had grown back, rather than something she had always had. Garrett came in 10 minutes later. He was young, early 20s, she guessed, dark-haired and watchful, with the specific quality of stillness she was learning to associate with the pack. Not nervousness, readiness. There was a difference. You're the one who brought him in, he said, by way of introduction. Yes, she said. He looked at her with straightforward assessment. Can you move quietly in the snow? Quietly enough, she said. The eastern slope is steep in the middle section, he said. There's a shelf about 200 meters down that catches the light differently. The trap was set in a gully off that shelf. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket. Sable's map, Mara guessed. I'll take us in from the north side so we stay out of Owen's sightlines. How long? An hour out, an hour back. Less if the snow is settled. He looked at her coat. You have good boots. She looked at her feet. Her grandfather's old mountain boots, oiled and resoled twice, and completely without style, and absolutely impervious to cold. Yes, she said. He nodded once. Then let's go. The ridge at night was a different thing entirely from the ridge during the day. It was darker than dark, the kind of dark that existed before any human settlement had put light into the night, where the only brightness was the snow, reflecting whatever the stars and the crescent moon gave it, and the cold was past the point of being something you felt in your skin. It was something you felt in your skeleton. Mara moved behind Garrett and kept the distance he set and did not talk. He moved with the kind of quiet that she recognized. It was the same quality her grandfather had when they walked together. The quality of someone who had learned that the mountain listened. The eastern slope came up gradually and then pitched down sharply, exactly as Garrett had described, and the shelf he had mentioned was a natural ledge of rock protruding from the slope, snow-covered and very still. He stopped at the edge of it and held up a hand, and she stopped. He listened for a long moment. Then he nodded, and they went down off the shelf into the gully below. The trap was still there. What remained of it was set in the shadow of the gully wall, a partial mechanism, the trigger component still intact, the rest of it either broken by Calum's escape or deliberately left incomplete. She crouched next to it and looked without touching. "The casing," Garrett said quietly behind her. "Look at the inner edge." She looked. The metal casing of the trigger had a marking on it, a stamp, the kind a craftsman puts on a tool. Not pack markings, a specific personal insignia. "That's Owen's mark," Garrett said. "He smiths his own tools, all of them." "That's enough for the elders?" "More than enough," he said, "if we can bring the casing back intact." She had a cloth in her coat pocket. She had thought to bring one, which she would only later reflect on as the kind of instinct that comes from growing up with someone who believed in being prepared for anything. She wrapped the casing carefully and placed it inside her coat, against her body where the warmth would keep her grip sure. They started back. The return took longer because of the slope and because the snow had started again, light, not the violence of the previous night, but enough to change the texture of the surface and slow them both down. Mara kept her footing and kept her breathing even, and did not think about what would happen if Owen had been watching. They came back over the shelf and onto the upper ridge, and Garrett exhaled. "That's the hard part done," he said. They were 300 meters from the camp. The voice came from the left, from the trees, and it belonged to the man Mara had already decided it belonged to. "Actually," Owen said, "it isn't." He came out of the tree line with two others behind him. He was bigger than she had registered from across the crowd, taller, heavier, with the specific build of someone who had spent a long time expecting to need to use it. He was not moving fast. He was moving with the patience of someone who had already done the math and liked the answer. Garrett shifted his weight, and Mara touched his arm once, lightly. "Wait." She stepped forward, not toward Owen, just forward, slightly in front of Garrett, not because she was trying to be brave, but because her grandfather had told her once that the worst thing you can do when something large and dangerous decides to pay attention to you is to look like you are afraid to be seen. "You've been busy," Owen said. He looked at her coat. He knew what was inside it. "So have you," she said, "for longer than one night, apparently." His eyes moved to her without humor. "You are very far from home," he said. "I'm on my grandfather's ridge," she said. "He walked this mountain for 30 years. I used to walk it with him." She held his gaze. "I'm not far from anything." He stopped. 6 feet away. The two men behind him had stopped too. "Give me what you took from the gully," he said. "No," she said. She said it the way she said most things, not loudly, not with any performance of courage. Just the word, placed in the cold air between them, complete and unambiguous. Owen looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, to the two men, "Take it from her." What happened next happened quickly. The first man moved toward her left side, and she stepped away from it, not running, just refusing the angle, and Garrett had moved at the same time, placing himself between the second man and Mara's right, and there was a moment where everything was suspended and very loud in its silence. Then a sound from the ridge above them, not a voice, not words, a sound that settled over the slope the way a very large and very calm thing settles when it has made a decision, and everyone within earshot heard it and understood it at the same cellular level that all living things share regardless of what form they walk in. Calum stood on the shelf above them. He had come on foot. She did not know how he had known. She would ask him later, and he would tell her that he had woken and she was not in the camp, and that was all the information he had needed. He was standing on the shelf in the moonlight, and his eyes were on Owen, and the two men who had been moving toward her had gone completely still. "Enough," Caleb said. He said it once. He did not need to say it twice. Owen looked up at him, a long look, the calculation visible in it even from a distance, the weighing, the measuring, the old impulse to resist. Then he stepped back. Not surrender, not entirely, but the stepping back of a person who had decided this was not the moment, not the ground, not the right set of odds. He turned and walked back into the tree line, and the two others followed him. Garrett breathed out. Mara kept her hand against her coat, against the wrapped casing inside it, and she looked up at Caleb on the shelf. In the moonlight and the light snow he was very still, and the silver mark on his ribs was invisible under the wool coat, but she knew it was there. She knew exactly where it was. "You should be sleeping," she called up to him. "You should not be alone on an eastern slope in the dark," he said. "I had Garrett." "Yes," he said. "I saw." She climbed up to the shelf. He reached down and took her hand for the last steep step, and he did not let go immediately when she was up, and she did not pull away. His hand was warm in the cold, the way his side had been warm against her on the cabin floor, the night before, the night that felt further away than it actually was, and closer than anything she had known in a long time. "The casing has his mark on it," she said. "Garrett says it's enough for the elders." "It is," he said. "Then by morning this can be done." "Yes," he said. He was still looking at her. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," she said. She turned toward the camp, and he walked beside her, and Garrett moved ahead, giving them the space that people give to people when they understand something is happening that is not about them. The snow came down lightly around them, and the camp lights were visible through the trees ahead, warm and amber in the dark. She had the evidence in her coat, and the cold at her back, and the warm large fact of him walking next to her, and she was not afraid of any of it. That was new, too. Owen was brought before the elders before the sun was fully up. Mara sat outside the main structure where the meeting was held. She had not been asked to be present for the formal proceeding, and she had not argued. The internal workings of the pack's law were not hers to attend as a right. She had given Garrett the casing before dawn and told him to take it directly to the oldest of the elders, the white-haired man who had known her grandfather. His name was Aldrich. She had learned that much. The meeting took 2 hours. She sat outside with a cup of coffee that Garrett had brought her, and she watched the morning come in over Ashwood Ridge in the specific way mountain mornings came in when the sky was clear after snow, hard and blue and very bright, the kind of brightness that had no softness to it, that laid everything bare. When the elders came out, they came in a group, and Owen was not with them. Aldrich looked at her from across the space between the structure's entrance and where she was sitting, and he gave her a single nod, brief and deliberate, the kind of nod that communicates a specific thing rather than a general sentiment. It was done. Caleb came out a few minutes later. He walked to where she was sitting and sat down beside her on the wooden bench. Carefully, she noticed, favoring the left side, the stitched side. "How is it?" she said. "It will be better by tomorrow," he said. "It should be rested," she said. "It should be," he agreed. "But the ceremony tonight requires the alpha to be present." She looked at the ridge in the morning light. "The midnight ceremony. The threat is removed," he said. "Owen will go before a formal pack tribunal in 3 days' time. He has no support left among the elders." He paused. "You made that possible." "Sable helped," she said. "Sable trusted you," he said, "which is not a small thing. She does not trust easily." "I know," Mara said. "I think we understand each other." He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him looking at her the way she had felt it since the first morning, that particular, complete quality of attention that made her feel less like she was being watched and more like she was being seen. She had spent years distinguishing between the two. "After the summit," he said, "the The pack will return to the northern valley for the winter. The cabin will be quiet. She turned and looked at him. His eyes held the same depth they always did, and there was something in them now that had not been there, or had not been visible, when he had first opened them in the cabin. Not uncertainty. He did not appear to have a great talent for uncertainty. Something closer to the look of a man who was aware of what he wanted, and equally aware that wanting was not the same as having any right to say so. "You are trying to tell me something," she said. "I am trying not to say it badly," he said. She waited. He held her gaze steadily. "The pack has laws about the alpha's mate," he said. "I told you that. What I did not tell you is that those laws were written for situations where both parties already knew what the bond was." He paused. "This is not that situation." "No," she said. "You owe me nothing," he said. "You stopped in the snow because that is who you are. What happened after is what happens. It moves regardless of whether either of us planned it." He looked away from her for a moment, at the ridge, at the hard blue sky. "But I am aware that my world is large, and your life was already built, and I have no right to ask you to make any decision about what comes next, based on 2 days." Mara thought about what he had just said. She thought about it with the same honesty she tried to apply to everything, looking at it from several angles rather than the one that was easiest. Her life was built. He was right about that. She had an apartment in the city, a job she had not gone back to since her grandfather died, a life made of routine and sufficient distance from other people. It was a life she had constructed out of the understanding that less attachment meant less loss, and she had believed in that architecture with the tenacity of someone who had been badly hurt by what falls apart when the architecture fails. But she was also sitting on a bench on Ashwood Ridge in the morning, after the hardest 2 days she had had in years, and she had not once, wished she were somewhere else. She had been present for all of it. She had been more present in the last 48 hours than she had been in the previous 3 years. That was not nothing. "I'm not in a hurry," she said. He looked at her. "The summit lasts 2 more days," she said. "After that you go back to the northern valley, and I go back to the cabin to finally sort my grandfather's things. Those are the facts." She looked at him. "But the cabin is on your boundary, which means we are neighbors, in a way." She paused. "And I don't know what I'm going back to in the city." He did not fill the pause. She left after that. He let it be there. She appreciated that more than she would have said. "I would like," he said after a moment, "to know what you decide, when you decide it." "That's reasonable," she said. "It is very little to ask," he said. "Most of the real things are," she said. She looked back at the ridge. The snow was bright in the morning sun, untouched and clean from the cabin doorstep all the way to the tree line, and it was the same snow it had been the night she had walked out and seen the dark trail moving through it, the same snow that had made her stop. She thought about how easy it would have been not to stop, how many times she had not stopped, how good she had gotten at moving through things without letting them land. And then she thought about that morning, the second morning, not the first, when she had woken up on Ashwood Ridge in a canvas shelter, with strange people all around her, and a piece of evidence in her coat that was going to change the shape of a conflict she had walked into 3 days ago, and she had lain there in the dark before the others were awake and thought, "I am exactly where I am supposed to be." The second time, twice in 3 days. That was a different kind of evidence. "There is one more thing," Caleb said. She looked at him. "The bond," he said. "I should have explained it properly earlier, and I did not. I told you the practical implications, the pack's recognition, the standing it confers." He looked at his hands for a moment. "I did not tell you what it actually is." "Tell me now," she said. He looked at the ridge the same way she had been looking at it. "It is not a rule," he said. "It is not a law or a convention or a thing the pack decided. Those things came after, the way human laws come after the things humans already know to be true." He paused. "The bond is a recognition. It means, the part of me that is oldest, that is animal, that is not shaped by choice or language, that part recognized something in you the moment you put your hands on me in the dark. He paused again, recognized it, and stopped looking. She sat very still. "Stopped looking," she said. "I am 400 years old," he said. "I have been searching, in the way the pack understands searching, for longer than your country has existed." He looked at her. "I stopped in the snow, on a ridge, in the middle of a trap set by my own blood, in the worst situation I have been in for decades." He held her gaze without apology. "And then I stopped looking." Mara held that. She held the size of it, which was very large, and the simplicity of it, which was also very large, and the way it sat against everything she had told herself for the past several years about what she needed, which was nothing like what this was. "That's a significant thing to tell someone," she said. "Yes," he said. "You could have left it out." "I could have," he said. "I chose not to." She looked at him. His eyes were the same as they had been from the first moment, dark and direct and entirely present, without any apology for the depth of them. He had stopped looking, 400 years, and he had stopped looking, because of her and because of the dark, and because her heartbeat had not changed when she touched him. She thought about her hands, how they had not shaken on the eastern slope, how they had not shaken since. She thought about the feeling, twice now, in 3 days, of being exactly where she was supposed to be. "I'm not making any large decisions today," she said. "No," he agreed. "Or tomorrow." "Of course not," he said. "But I'll stay for the ceremony tonight," she said, "and through the end of the summit." He nodded once. "And then," she said, "I'll go back to the cabin." "Yes," he said. "And you'll know where I am," she said. He looked at her. "I will always know where you are," he said. Not possessively, just plainly, the way he said most things, as a fact he had accepted rather than a claim he was making. She let it sit between them. The cold was bright and clean, and the ridge was very quiet, and somewhere behind them the camp was waking up, the sounds of morning coming through the canvas, voices and movement, and the smell of wood smoke. She thought, "I stopped for him." She thought, and the stopping changed the shape of everything after it. She thought, that is not a small thing. She had kept herself moving for years, away from things, through things, past things. She had called it surviving, and it had been, for a while. And then it had become a habit, and then it had become a wall, and she had not known it was a wall until she walked out into a snowstorm to get wood for a fire and found a dark trail in the snow and stopped. She turned to Caleb. He was looking at the ridge. The morning light was full on his face, and the silver mark was hidden under the coat, and he looked like a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had, in the last 2 days, put some of it down. "Tonight," she said, "at the ceremony, I'll be there." He looked at her. "Not because the pack expects it," she said. "Not because of what it signals or what it means in your law." She held his gaze. "Because I want to be there." He was quiet for a long moment. "That is all I have ever asked of anything," he said. She nodded. She looked back at the ridge, and she let the morning settle around her, the cold and the light and the smell of snow and smoke and the particular quiet of a mountain after a storm, and for the first time in a very long time she did not feel the pull toward the next place she needed to be. She was here. This was enough. The midnight ceremony began without announcement. One moment the camp was as it had been all evening, quiet voices, the low light of iron stoves glowing through canvas, the cold and steady presence of the mountain above them. And then, without anything Mara could point to as a signal, the pack moved. They rose together, those who were inside and those who had been standing at the edge of the firelight, and they moved to the center of the ridge in the same organic way they had gathered when she arrived. No one told her to come. No one told her to stay back. She pulled on her coat and walked out into the dark and stood at the edge of the gathering, and no one around her moved away. That was new. She had felt, since her arrival, the precise quality of being tolerated, present but provisional. She had understood it and had not taken it personally, because she was new to this world and newness had to earn its place. But tonight was different. The woman to her left, a broad-shouldered woman of about 50, with deep-set eyes, who had not spoken to her once in 2 days, shifted her weight and made room on the ground beside her, as though it had always been there, as though Mara had always been standing next to her. Aldrich stood at the center of the ridge. His white hair caught the moonlight. He spoke in a low voice that somehow reached every corner of the gathering, not loud, just present, in the way old authority was present in old things, carried by its own weight. He spoke in a language she did not know. She listened to the sound of it anyway, the rhythm and cadence, and she thought about her grandfather walking this ridge for 30 years, keeping the boundary, watching the eagles, writing in his notebook, knowing all of this existed on the other side of his property line, and choosing, carefully and with intention, to maintain the distance. He had kept her from it, and she had found it anyway. She wondered if he had known she would. He had been a man who thought far forward. He had also been a man who believed strongly that people should come to the important things on their own. He would not have considered it protection to steer her away from the truth. He would have considered it premature. He would have believed she needed to be ready first. She stood in the midnight cold and thought, maybe I am. The language shifted. Aldrich moved to the edge of the circle and stepped back, and the center of the ridge was empty. Calum walked into it. He walked from the far side of the gathering, through the crowd which parted for him without being asked, and he came to stand in the center of the open space with the moonlight on him and the whole of the assembled pack around him. He was wearing the gray coat, her grandfather's coat, still, and it was still too short in the sleeve, and he wore it with the same ease he had worn everything else, the ease of a man who did not require the details to arrange themselves around him. He stood. He was still for a long moment, then he raised his face to the moon. It was not the dramatic gesture she might have imagined if someone had described it to her in advance. It was entirely without performance. It was the gesture of something old acknowledging something older, the way you might acknowledge a landscape you have walked through many times, not with wonder, but with the steady recognition between two things that have known each other long enough to need no introduction. The pack responded. Not sound, not howls. That was not what happened. Something subtler and stranger, a collective shift, a settling, as though the whole of the gathered people had taken the same breath at the same moment and then let it out together. The sensation of it moved through the air in a way Mara could feel against her skin. She felt it move through her too. Not belonging, not yet, and perhaps not ever in the full sense, but something adjacent to it. Something that recognized her presence and included it in the tally of what was here. She stood very still and let herself feel it. Calum lowered his face from the moon. His eyes moved across the gathered pack, slow and deliberate, and then they found her. Across the distance, in the dark, between 200 people and the cold and the enormous quiet of the mountain, they found her. He did not smile. He did not gesture. He just looked. She looked back, and she thought, I stopped for him, and he found me. And she thought, my grandfather kept the boundary for 30 years. He held the line with care and integrity, and he never once let the two worlds touch. And I love him for it, and I understand it, and I have spent 3 weeks grieving it. And she thought, I am going to let them touch. After the ceremony, the gathering dispersed slowly, the way large groups always dissolved when the formal thing was done, not all at once, but in clusters, people drifting back to the warmth of the camp. Mara stayed where she was until most of them had gone. Calum came to her. He came and stopped in front of her, and she looked up at him. He was taller than she had registered in the cabin, which had been small, but on the open ridge there was no illusion of scale, and the moonlight was full on both of them, and the cold was absolute. How is the wound? She said. Better, he said. Can I see? He was quiet for a moment, and then he pulled back the coat and the shirt, and she leaned forward and looked at the gauze in the moonlight. The wound beneath it was knitting. She could tell even through the dressing, the edges no longer pulled with that particular tension of a seam at risk. The healing of it was not like any healing she had seen, which was to say it was faster, the tissue already showing the early structure of repair. She straightened up. "It's good," she said. "Because of how it was stitched," he said. She looked at him. "Any wound would heal faster with proper care." "Not at this rate," he said. "There is something else. The mate bond, when it is recognized, affects the healing. It is documented in the pack histories." He paused. "I am telling you because you should know, not to make a claim." "You don't make claims," she said. "I try not to," he said. "I do not always succeed." She thought about, "She is mine," from the cabin doorstep to Sable's face. "Sometimes a claim is just the truth," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "sometimes." The ridge around them was very quiet. Everyone had returned to the camp. The moon was at its full height, and the snow was so bright under it that the ridge seemed lit from below, and the mountains above them were a black outline against a sky that was the very dark blue of the hour that would tip toward morning in 2 or 3 hours. "After the summit," she said. "Yes," he said. "I'll go back to the cabin," she said. "I'll sort my grandfather's things. It will take a week, maybe 2. There's a lot of him in that cabin, and I want to be careful about it." "Of course," he said. "And then I'll decide what to do about the city," she said. "I have an apartment there, a job, though I haven't been back in 5 weeks. Things I left," she paused. "I'll deal with those things." "I understand," he said. "But the cabin is on your boundary," she said, "which means that while I am there, we are close." "Yes," he said, "we are." She looked at him. "Then I would like," she said, "for you to come to the cabin after the summit is done and your responsibilities here are settled." She held his gaze. "Not to ask me anything, not to decide anything, just to come." He was quiet for a long moment. "I will come," he said. "And we'll see what it is," she said. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She turned and looked at the mountains, the vast dark shapes of them surrounding the ridge, and she thought about the girl she had been at 8 years old, standing next to her grandfather on this same ridge, with a notebook and a pair of old binoculars, writing down the time and direction of every eagle they saw. She had been good at patience then. She had learned it up here. The mountain had no interest in her schedule. She had forgotten it somewhere in the years between there and here, but she could feel it coming back. "There is one more thing," she said. "Yes?" he said. She turned to him. She held out her hand, palm up, not taking his, just offering it, the way you offer something you are giving rather than something you are requesting. He looked at her hand for a moment. Then he placed his hand in hers. She closed her fingers. "The bond," she said. "I know I haven't decided anything yet. I know we have to see, but the bond, I can feel it. I want you to know that I can feel it, and I'm not afraid of it." She looked up at him. "I was afraid of it 2 mornings ago, when my hands were shaking, but I'm not now." Caleb looked at her with those dark eyes that had found her across every distance she had put between them. "Why are you telling me?" he said. "Because you deserve to know," she said. "You have been honest with me at every point. That is rare. I want to be honest back." She paused. 400 years is a long time to stop looking. "I don't want you standing at the boundary of the ridge for the next 3 months, wondering if I noticed." Something moved in his expression, not the almost smile from the cabin, something fuller and quieter. "I noticed," she said. He held her hand and held her gaze, and the mountain held them both in the dark, and the cold was enormous and indifferent, and the silver mark was under his coat where she had stitched it closed with her grandfather's thread by lantern light in a snowstorm, and her hands were steady, and the bond was present and unhurried and completely without apology. In the days that followed, the summit wound down as summits do. The formal business concluded. The pack elders issued their findings on Owen, who was stripped of standing within the Eastern faction and bound to a period of isolation that the pack's laws called, with deliberate severity, the silence. Owen accepted it without speech. She had seen his face when the sentence was read, and she had understood it. Not defeat, exactly. The face of a man marking a boundary on a map that he intended to cross again, in better circumstances, at a better time. She had looked at Caleb when Owen's sentence was read and found him already watching her, and she had seen that he had read Owen's face exactly the same way. He knew. He would be ready. That was not her concern right now. The summit ended on the third morning. The pack departed in groups, heading north toward the valley, moving across the white ridge with the same organic collective motion she had seen since the first day, and the ridge became quieter, and then very quiet, and then still. Mara loaded her truck. Garrett came to say goodbye and shook her hand with a seriousness that she appreciated. The broad-shouldered woman who had made room for her the night of the ceremony came and stood next to Mara's truck for a moment without speaking, and then said with no preamble at all, "Edmund chose his ground well," and walked away. Mara stood next to the truck with her keys in her hand. Aldrich came last. He walked slowly, the way he did everything, with the pace of someone who had learned that the distance between two places was exactly as long as it was, and no shorter for hurrying. "He was a good man," Aldrich said. "Yes," she said. "He kept the boundary," Aldrich said. "Every spring for 30 years, he walked the full length of it and made sure it held. That is not a small thing." "No," she said, "it isn't. He told me, perhaps 15 years ago, that he had a granddaughter who was very like him." Aldrich looked at her steadily. He said, "She will find her way to the mountain. She always comes back to the mountain. I just have to make sure she is ready when she does." Mara stood very still with her keys in her hand. "I hope I am," she said, after a moment. "You pulled a wounded alpha out of a snowstorm with your bare hands and stitched him closed with surgical thread and sat on the floor next to him all night," Aldrich said. "I think your grandfather knew what he was doing." He walked away. She stood next to her truck in the morning light on the empty ridge, and the cold was clear and absolute, and the mountain was the same mountain it had always been, and the road south went back to the cabin, and the cabin went back to her grandfather's things, and her grandfather's things went back to all the years she had not known what she knew now. She got in the truck. She drove south along the ridge, back down the logging road, back through the trees, back to the narrow track and the cabin at the end of it, and she parked and sat in the truck for a moment with the engine running. Through the windshield, the cabin looked the same as it always had. Small, weathered, hers in the way the things you inherit are yours, complicated and given both at once. She turned off the engine. She went inside and looked at the space by the fireplace, where the rug was still stained, where the gauze was still on the floor, where the blanket was still folded on the cot where she had put it. She looked at the shelf with her grandfather's field supplies. She looked at the single mug on the counter that was not hers, the one she had given to Caleb, which he had left behind. She left it where it was. She put her coat on the hook and her boots by the door, and she walked to the window and looked out at the ridge, white and still in the morning light. She had a week's worth of her grandfather's things to sort through. She had an apartment in the city that needed a decision. She had a life that had been on pause for 5 weeks, waiting for her to figure out what shape she wanted it to take. And she had a man who was going to come to the cabin when the summit's business was done and sit at her table and drink her coffee, and they were going to see what it was. She put her hands flat on the windowsill and looked at the ridge and felt the steadiness in them, the same steadiness she had felt on the eastern slope, in the dark, with the evidence in her coat, and Owen 6 feet in front of her. Her grandfather had watched this ridge for 30 years. He had kept the boundary careful and clean. He had believed in the line between two worlds, and he had maintained it with integrity, and she loved him for the care of it. But she was not her grandfather. She was something new, maybe, on a boundary that had been there longer than she had been alive. Not a crossing, not an end to the careful thing he had built. Something else. Something that took the care he had given the boundary and put it into what came after instead. She did not have the word for it yet. She would find it. She stood at the window in her dead grandfather's cabin on the edge of a ridge she had known since she was 8 years old, and she looked at the snow, and she was not afraid of anything that came next. That evening she built the fire and sat on the floor in front of it, the same spot, the same position, without really planning it. The coals settled, the wind moved around the cabin. The mountain was very large and very quiet outside. She held her own hand on her knee, felt the warmth of it, and let herself believe the next thing. 3 days later, there was a knock at the cabin door. Not 3 sharp raps like the pack had given. One knock, single and unhurried. She had been sorting through her grandfather's notebooks. 74 pages of eagles. She set the notebook on the table and went to the door and opened it. Calum stood on the step in the morning light with her grandfather's gray coat over one arm and his eyes steady and his expression carrying, for the first time since she had known him, the particular quality of a person who has not prepared what they are going to say. She stepped back from the door. He came in. She put the kettle on. The fire was already built, already burning, the cabin warm and lit and full of the smell of old wood and old books and her grandfather's life, which was becoming, slowly and with her attention, the foundation of whatever she was going to build next. Calum sat at the table. She sat across from him. Outside, the ridge was still and white, and the eagles were somewhere above it, riding the cold thermal drafts the way they always had, the way they always would, the way her grandfather had watched them do it for 30 years in his good notebook with his good eyes. She looked at the man across the table. He looked at her. The kettle began to heat. She did not reach for anything or say anything, and neither did he, and the space between them was not empty. It was full of the snowstorm and the wound and the blood on the floor and the shaking of her hands and the steadiness that had replaced it, full of Sable's recalibrating eyes and Garrett's careful footsteps in the dark and Aldrich's voice and the weight of 400 years and the particular miracle of a person who had stopped looking. Full of the stopping, full of what the stopping had been worth. She put her hands on the table, open, and let them be seen. He placed his hand over one of them, warm and steady, the same warmth she had fallen asleep against on the floor of this cabin, and the silver mark on his ribs was healed now, or nearly, the thread she had used already dissolved, the skin underneath already closing. But she had been there when it was open, and that was not a small thing. That was not a small thing at all.